It's 11:47 p.m. on Friday the 6th of December 1991, and the Austin Fire Department has received a call about a blaze at a yogurt shop in the city's north. When firefighters arrive, they enter the premise and quickly get to work extinguishing the fire. But as the flames die down and the smoke clears, a horrifying scene is revealed. 4 teenagers, 4 children, lay dead on the floor. They've been brutally murdered in the tiny workspace that sits behind the shop's serving area. A cheerful, family-friendly store that sells fun-coloured yogurts with the tagline, "Where healthy never tasted so good." What these firefighters witness will haunt them for many years to come, leaving some with PTSD and others with acute emotional distress. What they've just discovered is about to become the biggest crime Austin, Texas has ever seen. A crime that will steal a city's innocence and leave 3 local families heartbroken. I'm Gemma Barth, and you're listening to True Crime Conversations, a podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. A warning, today's episode includes child murder and graphic descriptions of violence. Please take care while listening. The murders of 13-year-old Amy Ayres, 17-year-old Eliza Thomas, and sisters 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison and 15-year-old Sarah Harbison shocked the entire world, with the brutality of the crime unlike anything many of these first responders on the scene had ever seen. The girls were tied up with their own clothing and shot in the head. There was evidence of sexual assault on 3 of the 4 victims. Solving this crime has not been straightforward. In fact, it's taken 34 years, with the person responsible finally discovered thanks to some incredible detective work and the developments of DNA science in 2025. Robert Eugene Brashes, however, the serial killer who did this, died by suicide in 1999. He will never see the inside of a jail cell for this horrific crime. Today's guest has been working on an HBO A24 documentary series called The Yoghurt Shop Murders for the last few years. She never expected that her deep dive into a decades-old crime would turn into breaking news. Margaret Brown is a highly acclaimed American film director who was kind enough to invite us virtually into her kitchen to talk about the murders, the families, the various suspects over the years, what it was like making the documentary, and the incredible twists that have recently emerged in this story. Here's Margaret. Margaret, thank you for joining us on True Crime Conversations. You released this documentary more than 30 years after the crime. Is this a crime that stayed with you? What made you want to revisit it?
I live in Austin, so I've been hearing about the crime since I got here in the late 90s, and people would talk about it at parties. It was something, I was actually just having lunch with a friend, and he was talking about how he moved here way before I did in the early 90s. And he was talking about how he would go to this gun shop and all the cops in Austin would just be talking about the crime. It was really like in the 90s, something that people just talked about all the time. There were billboards up all over the city. So it was just sort of literally hovering over you.
Because I've heard a lot in your documentary, people using the phrase, it took the city's innocence. So it really was kind of the biggest crime that the city had seen. Is that right?
I mean, I wasn't here when it happened, but I definitely moving here, and I have I have friends who were on the cheerleading team with those girls. Like it's something that Austin still sort of feels like a small town in a way, even though now it's one of the biggest cities in America. And it's kind of like the thing where everyone has a story about it. A lot of people feel really, really deeply connected to the crime.
There was a breakthrough in this case, this decades-old case, a few weeks after you premiered? 3 weeks. Yes. Did you know that was coming?
I had a sense because I had a sense because I could tell I could tell there was some excitement on the police force, but they're not going to share anything with me before they share it with the families. But I had a sense something was coming down the pipe.
What are the chances though? Like you premiere and then 3 weeks later, that is crazy.
It's crazy of a 34-year-old crime.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to go back to the start. I want to take listeners through this case. Can you tell us about Austin in 1991? I know you weren't there, but what was it like? Was there much crime? Can you kind of set the scene for us?
The crime happened to 4 white girls. White people in Austin, I think, felt really protected back then. And it wasn't like Barbara, the mother of 2 of the girls who were killed, said, she always says it was 4 white girls. It was big news, big news. That's the way she phrases it. And I think that there was this sense of just safety. Kids rode their bike everywhere. I mean, Sonora, who was Eliza's sister, was another one of the 4 girls that were murdered. She talks about just riding her bike all around that neighborhood where they were murdered. I think there was just a sense of nothing really happens like that in Austin. It was like a quiet university town. And, but it was also kind of a place where there was a lot of counterculture. I think Slacker, Richard Linklater's movie, came out in 1991. And it was definitely a place where it was like a lot of counterculture, like hippies, the punk scene. Like it was definitely somewhere that was, not necessarily like normal Texas.
And the yogurt shop, for Australians, the closest I can kind of compare it to is like a yochi, where it's like it's the same thing, but the modern version where you self-serve kind of yogurt and then you put toppings on top.
Okay.
So it's
that sounds like
it's the same thing, but obviously that was the 90s version, the yogurt shop in Austin. And to help kind of paint the picture for listeners, it was kind of in a strip mall. So it's not a hugely trafficked area, is it? It's kind of it's not in a mall.
It actually was. It was near this mall called North Cross Mall, and it was like walkable to the mall. So it kind of was an area where like teenagers hung out. There was a creek behind it where people would go and like drink beer, like get away from your parents. So again, it sort of was a place, like a lot of my friends say that creek behind North Cross Mall was where people went to like hang out and like get away.
The victims, I want to say their names before we get to their stories. We've got 17-year-old Eliza Thomas, 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison, her sister, 15-year-old Sarah Harbison, and 13-year-old Amy Ayres. Can you tell us a bit about them? Who were they?
They were 4 girls who knew each other from FFA, which is called Future Farmers of America, and they raised farm animals together. But that's not as sort of like, I think they weren't like all... They actually, like back in Austin, my friends had said those kind of people were called kickers, which are just like, it's like shit kickers, like cowgirls. But I don't think you could stereotype them cleanly that way. Like they were definitely, they were also on the cheerleading team. Some of them were like, Jennifer was a runner. I think Eliza wasn't really like that at all. Her father was a university professor, or like part of that stereotype. So I think they were, they were bound by their love of like farm animals and country music, but that wasn't like the totality of who they were.
December 6, 1991, only Jennifer and Eliza were actually on shift that day at the yogurt shop. So how did the younger girls come to be there?
They came because they were all going to hang out that night. And I believe that like Sarah was going to spend the night with Amy. And so she went over because Jennifer would drive them home. So they went over from the mall. They walked over from the mall and they were having pizza from the Mr. Gaddy's next door. So they were sitting in one of the booths having pizza, waiting for the two. And I think they were helping them clean. Like, when you close the yogurt shop, there's all this cleaning you have to do. And so they were probably helping out in the back.
Do we know anything about the shift prior to the murders, what they were doing prior to that? Have any of the customers or anything helped piece that together?
Actually, John Jones, the head investigator at the beginning, he had a whole, like he got in touch with everyone who had been at the yogurt shop before that. And he hypnotized them. He talked to all of them. So to piece together exactly what you're talking about. So we do have a map of everyone who was at the yogurt shop, I believe from like 3 p.m. until it closed.
How were authorities first alerted to anything wrong, anything that was happening at the shop?
There was a fire reported at the shop. And so we actually are, strangely, there was a camera crew with John Jones the night of this crime. And so they have him getting the call and telling him to go to the yogurt shop. And people, like, we had to do, it was very hard to make that footage. And I still wonder sometimes if people think it's a reenactment, but no, it really was true that there was a camera crew in the car with him the night of the crime. And they filmed him getting the call.
I didn't even think while watching the documentary, but you're right. How was there footage of the lead detective arriving? That is crazy.
And he talks about how he was with these reporters, and they were talking about how nothing ever happens in Austin, and they were just riding around with him. And Houston, so many things happen in Houston, and then the biggest crime in like Texas happens like while they're in the car.
Oh my God.
I know.
So the firefighters arrived expecting, a structure fire. They walked in on something horrific. Can you help to explain that? And a warning to listeners, it is very graphic, but can you tell me what they found?
Well, they were putting out the fire and someone noticed a body part and a hand, I believe, and or maybe a leg, and they realized that it wasn't just a fire, like someone was trying to cover it up. Someone was trying to cover up a crime.
Once they kind of walked further into the room, they found 4 bodies, the 4 bodies of the girls.
At first they found 3. Like when you listen to the tape in the film, they say it's a triple homicide, and then they correct it and say it's a quadruple homicide because one of the girls was apart from the other 3. So basically the fire started, and the firemen, when they came in, obviously started putting out the fire. So it basically flooded the area that had been burned.
The girls had been kind of stripped or partially stripped and gagged, and I can only imagine what that scene would have looked like for those emergency responders. We know that they were shot, that's how they were killed. Was there any evidence of sexual assault?
Yes. And the full proof of that wasn't really revealed until this year.
Really? Is that because of DNA, and DNA back in the 90s wasn't quite as strong?
I believe so, yes.
When you say the full extent wasn't realised until this year, were all the girls assaulted?
I believe 3 were assaulted.
Wow.
There was a reason I wanted to make this, and it's because, I'm from Austin, and I don't watch true crime, I guess, because I don't necessarily like thinking about what was done to these girls or what they were thinking when they died. And since I made it, I've, installed a security system in my house. I mean, it made me incredibly paranoid working on this. And I really don't know how people make true crime over and over. And when you're asking me the graphic questions, it's like, it's interesting. Like, I mean, I know all the answers, but it's something I thought about a lot because I know all the family members so well. And this was not a show where we tried not to focus on some of these details just because I know how hard they are for the families. And it's just so horrific that, I try to stay away from it. I realize that it's part of the story and you have to delve into it. But I almost never talk about that part of it. And the editors, they know how sensitive I am. And there's some pictures I have never even looked at. And ones we purposefully did not put in the documentary because we felt like no one needs to see this.
It is really hard.
Yeah. I guess I wanted to say that because, when you're asking me these questions, it's honestly like I am really interested in psychologically what happens to people when you're dealing with like trauma, like something this traumatic in our lives. We all have to deal with trauma. But my interest in the story is really like these people went through probably the most horrific thing you can go through, which is your daughters are murdered and since they're probably almost definitely sexually assaulted, although it's not something I really talked about with the parents because I didn't feel like that was something I needed to talk about. And then, it's all over the media, so everyone feels like they have a piece of it. And then you don't really know what happens. There's people who are accused, but there's always a question. And so I was really interested because we all encounter grief in our lives, and but these people have the most extreme form of it you can even imagine. And so I guess the reason I wanted to tell this story is because I thought that could be helpful to people to go there,
It's a really hard line to walk when you work in the true crime world and telling these stories is how do you tell the story and what happened while not re-traumatizing the victims, going into too much detail, but also balancing that. So you did a really great job of that in that I think when people watch your documentary, they will understand what happened to the girls, but it isn't sensationalized, graphic kind of content.
Yeah. I mean, there's some of it just sensational because of what it is and you can't get away from it to tell the story. But we talked about that a lot on our production team, like how much is too much because this was a really hard thing to make. And, A24 got therapy for the whole team. And, so it's not, I think that's something that's really necessary in stories like this because it's very hard to process and sit with these people when they're reliving this. Just so you can get their interview, you're asking these people to go through this thing again, and it's hard to ask people to do that, and it's hard to watch them go through it.
Well, you mentioned you spoke to kind of sisters, fathers, mothers, brothers, friends of these girls. What did you personally take away from those conversations, from revisiting their grief and their memories?
I mean, it really helped me personally think about things in my own life and how I talk to people about hard things that happen to them and how I process it for myself. Because, I mean, when you're talking to someone like Barbara, who's the mother of two of the girls that died, like she is sort of like this Zen master in a middle-aged lady's body, and she's just dealt with so much and she deals with it with such lightness and grace. And, all of the families have had to go through the unimaginable. And it's just really interesting and to watch how everyone deals with grief differently.
What I found interesting was watching how public the families were. They really gave themselves to the media in an effort to try and find the killers. But I think it's Barbara that tells you that it really started to take a toll.
Yeah. I mean, I realized too, that's, when I interviewed her, it was 33 years later. And Sonora, Eliza's sister, is very close to her. Eliza is one of the girls that was murdered. And Sonora told me that, Barbara had said that she was in bed for a month after the interview. And it's just hard to think I did that to somebody.
Another detail that got to me that I hadn't thought of, and it's like the ripple effect of crime, is the 24-year-old manager of that yogurt shop that was called in to identify them, and the grief on her face when you're interviewing her about that.
Yeah.
How was that for you?
I mean, it was very difficult to get her to do that interview because she's carried it with her whole life. And she also felt like a mother to those girls, Eliza and Jennifer, and particularly Eliza. And so I think she felt this responsibility. She was supposed to be on shift that night. And she felt that responsibility of not being there, doing something that could have protected them, although we know now there's nothing she could have done. But, I think that to have to live with that would be so difficult. So I was really honored that she finally decided to do the interview. I know it was really hard on her. But, when you make these films, you try to support everyone as much as you can, but just allow them, as much as they want to talk about it or not.
Well, you went as far as kind of talking about a fifth victim in your documentary, which was Sonora, the sister. Can you tell us about working with her and how much this crime affected her? Because why was she the fifth victim?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's definitely just Sonora. I would say that the fifth victim could be the city. I mean, I think that episode, the fifth victim, is you could translate it as Sonora, but um, the fifth victim could be like the city of Austin. It could be John Jones. It could be Bob Ayers, the father of Amy or Pam Ayers. I mean, again, like you said, this crime had a real ripple effect in how people. Everyone felt so connected to it. But yes, Sonora, I mean, Eliza was her best friend. And I'm actually like incredibly close to Sonora now because she kind of went through this with us. And she is someone who, after this happened to her when she was, a preteen, she is now a therapist and helps people deal with their own trauma. And I just thought that was so incredible that she would turn her own pain into something that helped other people. Like that's how she transposed what happened to her, the loss of her sister and best friend.
And she was a very strong person, you could tell. She's been through a lot.
She's been through a lot, yeah. She's incredibly articulate. Honestly, all the family members are incredibly articulate. It was, you can't pick the people you're making a film about in a circumstance like this. In many documentaries I make, there's like almost a casting process where you find like the best people. But with this, like, I couldn't believe it. Like, I mean, I think it's maybe because all the family members Bob Ayers is like an incredible storyteller. Like he basically comes from central casting of incredible storytellers, but yeah, I was so blessed to have these people who are so articulate with, Sean, his son, like how to express what had happened to them.
How did you get so many people that were close to this story on board? Because you had everyone. You had, the judges, all the police officers, all of the family members. I can imagine that was a huge effort to try and convince everyone.
I had a team. I mean, it wasn't just me, but I have been doing this a long time. And I think the way is because, like, I don't really know why everyone talked to me. Maybe I'm really persistent. But I also think that, like, I don't try to parachute in. I try to like talk to people a lot before, or as much as they want to. Sometimes people are like, yes, I'll talk to you. But with something like this, it's like this traumatic and also that was so long ago. And some people are like, I'm done with that. I talked about that for 20 years. I'm done. You have to kind of be like, well, I think this is why you should talk to me. And I usually explain like my approach, which is kind of a little different than maybe some of the other people who have talked to them in the past that are really focused on, because I was more interested in the grief and how maybe sharing how they've dealt with this could help other people instead of like the goriest details, So I could say that, and sometimes they'd be more interested, but sometimes not. Sometimes people are just done, So it was really, yeah, I'm not really, the answer is I don't really know why everyone talked to me, but I'm glad they did.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that early investigation looked like? Because there were quite a few things that kind of got in the way, mainly the fact that there was a fire and that there was a lot of water. So in the way of evidence, what were they working with? What was John, that lead investigator, working with?
I mean, it's kind of a perfect storm of this is fucked, like there's nothing much to work with. Like you can't, if I mean, this is horrific, but if like, you can't like, there's nothing that they could, the thing that really saved it was the fact that like they did DNA, which was like not a normal thing back then. It was something that was a new thing. And Huck, John's partner, was kind of a charmer, and he convinced the coroner to like, who wanted to just take the bodies, to wait for the DNA to get collected. And that is literally one of the main things that solved this case, was that like Huck is a charmer.
From pretty early on, the police kind of surmised that it was a robbery gone wrong. Is that what they were kind of working with?
That was one of the lead theories, was there's a robbery gone wrong.
Can you explain they found like evidence of multiple guns, which was a big part of the investigation.
Yes. There were 2 guns at the crime. There's something that one of the investigators calls a dancing gun. It's like called an AMT backup model. And it's like this tiny little gun. And there was that was one of the guns. And then there was a larger gun as well. And they were both used in the crime.
Next, the confessions that surfaced just 1 week after the crime and the red flags that had police feeling cautious. A week after the murders, 2 teenage boys were walking around a nearby mall, the mall that you mentioned before, with a gun. Can you explain what happened there? Because it was 16-year-old Maurice and 15-year-old Forrest.
Yes.
Obviously, police were called. What happened?
So this was, people were getting, it was basically like he had the same kind of gun that was used at the crime. And so he got pulled in and interrogated all night long. And the person who interrogated him was the kind of like star interrogator at the Austin Police Department, who had also gotten 5 other confessions from people too. So he was obviously very good at getting confessions. So Forrest confessed. He's a 16-year-old boy who stayed up all night, probably intimidated. But at the time, we just know that he confessed, and we have the confession, and it's in the documentary. And it basically he implicates other people other than himself.
So he implicates 2 other boys.
3 other boys. He implicates Forrest Welburn, who was his best friend at the time. And he mentions Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott, who were with him at the time, and the next day, actually, as well.
So he confessed, but nothing really came of that because these boys, we know now we're going to talk about, were arrested and much later, many, many years later. So why did nothing happen at the time? Why was that kind of evidence kind of left and parked?
I think because John Jones felt like it just didn't add up.
Right.
He got the confession. People knew that this cop, Hector Polanco, was really good at getting confessions, and there was no evidence. And so it was just a confession. And I think John just thought that it just wasn't enough. So they went out. Maurice went out and he wore a wire, and he spoke to Forrest and said that, what happened that night? Did you shoot these girls? And Forrest is like, what are you talking about? He has no idea what he's talking about. And he goes, but you said it. And Forrest is like, man, I was joking around. What are you talking about? And so I think at that point, John was just thought that, these are just kids,
He shows you in your documentary 2 pages worth of confessions, all different names, which was wild to me and he had in a column that a lot of them were bragging. Why would people, it's quite hard to get your head around, why would people brag about a horrific crime like this?
Well, I think about it this way, you're a teenager, you're trying to brag to your friends. It just seems so unreal. I mean, I've thought about this obviously for years, but I can remember what it was like in high school, and it's like a dark humor. Well, oh, did you do it? I can only surmise it's something like that. Just kids being disgusting, but not capable of murder. But I mean, I think I can't remember the exact number. I think there were 7 written confessions and 50 so people were confessing all over town.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
But like you said, I guess kids, they don't realize how serious it is to do something like that. They think they're having fun.
No, these are teenagers,
I wanted to skip us forward to the end of 1992 because there was a confession there that was taken really seriously out of Mexico. What happened there?
Yeah, there were some Mexican suspects, and it turned out that they were tortured by their own government to get the confessions. And Huck, Jones's partner, went down there to just see what was up, and he realized straight away that they didn't know anything about the crime. They were being fed what to say, and it was definitely one of those situations where it was immediately clear from someone who knew the crime that they didn't know any of the correct details.
Then if we fast forward again to 1997, a new team, a new police kind of task force is put on the case and kind of Huck and Jones are pushed to the side.
Yes.
Why? And what was the effect on those two men who had been working for years on this case?
They got really close to the families. And that was something, this was such a high profile case in Austin. Everyone was talking about it all the time. One of the reasons I took the job was because I realized there was like mountains of archival footage about this. Like I knew that I would be able to portray Austin in that moment in a really crystal clear way because the city and the media was fascinated with it. And so I knew that I had the materials to build the story because you don't always have that. You sometimes have to recreate it. And I knew that I would not have to do that. I could see the footage and I could see that like there was this version of Austin back then and of details of how it all went down back then that I would be able to really put the story together. But to answer your question, they made this decision, Huck and Jones, to kind of include the families in the investigation in a way, like let them into the police station in a way that I don't think they just felt for them so deeply. I mean, I think Huck and Jones were really empathic people. And there was a lot of pressure on them to solve it, but they also came to love the families. And in a way that made it really hard on them. And when they couldn't solve it right away, they got it really, I think it affected their marriages. It took a toll. It took a toll on so many people. I mean, moving forward, ask me that question again with the lawyers who were involved. I mean, there was a real ripple effect on how this crime affected everyone it touched. But at the beginning, it was really Jones and Huck and trying anything they could to make these families feel better. And part of that was just letting them into the process in a way that I think was highly unusual at the time.
Because Paul Johnston, the new kind of investigator that took over, he was a very different operator.
Yes, he felt like I think he saw what had happened with them and that they were diagnosed with PTSD and told they had to stop working on it because it was affecting their work and they were taken off of the case, which was very hard for both of them because they really, really wanted to solve it. And I think they're both very good investigators. And Paul had a really different approach, but probably part of it was just looking at the effect on Jones and on Huck and being like, well, obviously that didn't work. So I'm going to try a different tack, and not get close to the families and start over, And so he took the opposite approach that I'm not going to get close to the families. I'm going to look at everything again. I'm going to start over.
So he was the one that kind of revisited a lot of the tips, but he revisited the tip that we talked about with the four boys, Maurice and Forrest, and brought them all back in for interviews. You've got a lot of those interviews in the documentary, which are fascinating to watch, and you kind of unpack them. What did you make of those interviews?
Man, when I watched those interviews, I didn't know what to think.
Really?
How do they know some of the things they know in the interviews? And it is, my best friend is a reporter in Austin, and she and all her reporter friends were all like, you have to do this TV show because this is the case that has more rabbit holes than any case in Texas, and you'll never get to the bottom of it. And I kind of like, in addition to, I took that as a challenge almost. Well, I didn't really think at the time about like, oh, this is going to be really hard to tell because it's so traumatic. I thought like, oh, wait, it's the one with the most rabbit holes? Well, that sounds interesting. I didn't really know what I was doing. Like, it was very naive to be like, it's not like I thought I was going to solve it, but I thought that I was curious about unlimited rabbit holes. And I guess what my point would be is like looking at the confessions. At one point, Mike Scott says, like he says he thinks he might have killed someone, and there's things in it that you just can't explain unless somehow something about it. Or there are a few other options too, like maybe someone fed you that information. But when you're watching it fresh, you're just like, how do they know that? Like this, it was an interesting document to have. But then you learn about the Reed technique, and you think about, well, how are these confessions done really? Because some of it feels very coerced. Yeah, I mean, Forrest never confessed. He always said that he had nothing to do with it, and he was all of them were trying to be helpful. They're trying to be helpful. Forrest's mom talks about how all these kids were being pulled in. So you couldn't really tell. I mean, this is years later, the confessions you're talking about, but I think even years later, this is 8 years later. And even then, it's still like an alive thing in Austin. Everyone's still talking about, the billboards are still all over town. It never really died. Everyone knew it was unsolved. So everyone's just going in there trying to help out, So I think that's sort of the ethos of this. Like, no one knew how serious it was until it was serious. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, like the boys, they went and did the interviews of their own accord. They weren't arrested or anything like that.
They're trying to be helpful. They're trying to be like good citizens.
And they do say that in the interviews. They say, I'm here because I'm trying to help, or I don't remember. And then kind of the interviews go for ages and ages and ages. And then eventually we get these 2 confessions from these boys.
Yes.
Kind of talking about Maurice being more of a ringleader, but then implicating themselves in kind of parts of the crime as well.
Yes.
And then that leads to 4 arrests and charges?
I mean, you have to think about, like, I learned so much about, like, in America, like, the cops can lie to you. Like, I did not know that. Like, I mean, of course, like, you grow up as a teenager thinking like, avoid the cops, but like, I didn't know that they could just make something up and act like it's true. And you think about that as a 15 or 16-year-old, absolutely, that's terrifying. Like, the fact that they would, like, Sharon, Forrest's mom, would just say he was a 15-year-old boy and the cops would just drive by his house and tell him to get in the car. He didn't have to get in the car, but he thinks he has to get in the car. No one's saying like, this is your choice at the time. But then as young men, 8 years later, it's still like your trust and authority figure. You don't know they can lie to you. There's not a lawyer present. It's kind of like, as someone, an older person to that, like, I still think if that had happened to me, there's some part of me that's going to like trust that, like, oh, they have my best interest at heart. But clearly that is not what happened.
Are you also kind of, is that how they would get to like a false confession, so to speak? Because this is a person of authority and you're kind of like convinced. Like, I'm trying to work out how, I know this is a big question in your documentary as well, like how would someone confess to something that they didn't do?
Well, I find this question incredibly fascinating, and I think it really depends on the person. There are different types of people who confess for different reasons, and it was kind of like a perfect storm. Like, I think that Mike Scott, in his effort to help, was able to be convinced, and maybe, they were making him like walk through the crime over and over and kind of role play. And I think for someone like the kind of person Mike Scott is, I think he was able to convince himself somehow that he did it. With Robert Springsteen, he's a different kind of person. I think he was just trying to get out of the room. He like realized like, something is messed up here. They have the wrong idea about me. I'm just going to say anything I can to get out of the room, because he felt like trapped. So I think they both did it for different reasons. But there's a technique called the Reed technique that is taught to police where it sort of walks you through how to get people to confess. And Huck talks about how he couldn't get anyone to confess. If he wants to, you have to use it for good, because you can get anyone to, he told me in the interview, oh, I can get you to confess to anything. You just don't even know. It's because I have this technique. I know how to do it.
Really?
So it's a little scary.
But it is interesting because Maurice and Forrest were given the same treatment and they didn't confess.
They did not confess, no.
So it doesn't work on everyone.
Not everyone, but I think you have to look at like who people are. Just like the way people respond to grief differently, people respond to intimidation differently. People are different, and these are also very young men. who are trying to help authority figures, and they might realize a little too late that maybe they took it too far. I think with Rob, that's what happened. He was like, I just got to get out of here. And with Mike, I think he just got confused.
Yeah.
But I don't know. With Mike, that one's more confusing to me because, like, how do you? There are experts that that talk about false confessions and why people confess, but I think like anyone who watches this is going to watch it and think like, I would never do that. But they're also not in that situation. They're not scared. They're not sleep deprived. I think like, it's in a way, it's like a form of torture. Just like keep someone in a room, keep telling them they did this thing. Like, I don't know. I mean, the brain is a crazy thing.
Apart from those 2 confessions from the boys, well, men, when they confessed, did they have any other evidence tying them to the crime?
None.
So no physical evidence at all?
No physical evidence.
Which is crazy to me because we're talking about a crime, and Springsteen and Scott were both charged and convicted. One got the death penalty, one got life on just a confession.
Correct. But those confessions are pretty grisly.
Well, the words that literally came out of their mouth were, I shot a gun in her head. Like it was a big confession.
And some very graphic rape details too that are, I would say, possibly even more horrific that are on the confession tapes. Maybe not more, but pretty horrific. Things that stick in your head.
So as I mentioned, Springsteen and Scott were charged and convicted. Wellborn was charged but never tried after 2 grand juries refused to indict him. And then Maurice Pierce spent 3 years in jail. Then the charges were dismissed and he was released. When you were revisiting all of those court proceedings around the 4, what did you make of it? I know you say you're not fully immersed in the true crime world all the time, but even if you aren't, like it was wild to watch all of that kind of unfold in hindsight.
No, I mean, I definitely have watched like, The Staircase, and I mean, I've watched like my fair share of true crime, but it wasn't, that's not really like what I've made in my career as a filmmaker is true crime. But I mean, I know like, the structure of a lot of true crime or how that works. But I mean, again, it was fascinating. It was like you said, like, why would you confess to something you didn't do? And, and you think about that a lot. And then, you think about like, it's unreal that this person got, like you said, like the death penalty for something with no material evidence. And I mean, the entire Austin Police Department, well, except for a few people who are in the film, believe they did it, like with some kind of certainty, and, when I was making this, friends of mine would write me on social media who went to high school with the boys telling me they knew the boys did it, and people in Austin who just, people thought they did it.
Well, when someone confesses, you take them at their word. But
right.
The defense lawyers did actually start to poke holes in their confessions.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which you showed as well. So, like, things didn't match up.
That did not convince the jury.
It didn't, which is, yeah, I guess a confession is a powerful thing.
Yes.
After the break, how did the victims' families react when Springsteen was sentenced to death and Scott received life in prison? I found the families' reactions really interesting to the 2 boys being charged, especially the death penalty. Barbara in particular was really upset by it and saying, I didn't want to take another life, which I found fascinating because usually these families, they want justice, especially when something so horrific has happened to a loved one.
I think Barbara is a really, like I said before, she's kind of otherworldly. Like, I also wonder, and this is a question, it's not any kind of certainty. After, not to be spoiler, you can include this however you want, but after having made the 5th episode and asked a lot of these questions again, now that we really know 3.7 million to 1 who did this, according to Dan's work, it made me look back and wonder, was there some part of these families' brain that never really believed those boys did it?
Right.
And I wonder, in hindsight, because, we were making the movie. Like, we really didn't think the boys did it, like I did not believe they did it when I was making it, but there was still part of me that wondered because of the confessions, because like there was no certainty, and I also felt like I couldn't end the fourth episode by absolutely saying they didn't do it, even though I thought they didn't do it, because there was no certainty. But to take the other part of it, like the families know in some part of their brain, there's no material evidence. The DNA does not match. So I wonder if Barbara, in some part of her brain, was like, are we making a mistake? This is a question that filmmakers ask themselves, or I asked myself. And, there was a very big filmmaking team behind this. It's not just me.
Yeah.
And so there's a whole, text message chat with all of our theories going on for 3.5 years with like 20 people. Just at all hours of the night, you look in the morning and there's another, we didn't know. We're in the morass of it all with everyone else.
Even as someone who knows what's happened after the fact, I watched the documentary going, oh, did they do, like, and I knew what the answer was. And I was like, did they do it though? Even though I knew. Yeah. So I can completely understand when you didn't have the certainty of the actual answer, why you would have been like, oh, what do I do with this?
Right. And you want to be fair to everyone. Like, I don't want to, because I don't know, and I'm not going to pretend to know. So you have to, I feel like I had to just every day go into it with beginner's mind, because I have an idea what I think, but I sure as hell don't know that.
This is what you were talking about with rabbit holes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How
were those convictions overturned? Because that happened many, many years later, I think around 2007, 8, if I'm right. So, these men spent a decade, or nearly a decade, in prison.
Basically, the Supreme Court changed something about the law that said you can't testify against someone else, like if you're involved in the case. So Rob and Mike had, even though it had been redacted, it was clear that they were the only witness against each other, and so it got thrown out.
And they literally got out.
Yeah, but they were never cleared of the crime, which I found out talking to Forrest, that is a very big distinction, because that means everyone still thinks you did it and your life is still basically ruined.
Well, he described it as, I walked out of prison into another prison, basically, with everyone thinking I was guilty.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I don't know, he must have said that in something else. That is not in my documentary, but I can imagine him saying it because, I realized, because I didn't talk to any of, well, they're men now, but everyone calls them the boys. And like when you talk to Forrest, the way he talks about what he went through, you realize like he was only, I mean, man, it affected him the least. He was in jail for 3 months and it ruined his life. Mm-hmm. Like, he got pulled over by the cops all the time. Even when we were making it a few months ago, his lawyer would say to me like some cop that had been following Forrest. I mean, people were still convinced that they did it. It was insane.
Well, Maurice died at the hands of police.
Yes.
In 2010. So, I mean, it followed him too. Right.
No, I think he had total PTSD. He was terrified of cops, and a cop killed him. Yes.
So the plan was to retry these men and try and get them back to prison. And then that's when the DNA kind of comes into everything. So they were going to get the DNA and retry it with modern technologies. But you kind of show that the DA, the district attorney, was kind of trying to be like, well, it's contaminated, you can't use it. And you kind of proved that's not really a thing. Can you explain that?
Well, no, I mean, sometimes it absolutely can be contaminated. I think that, the site with the water and the fire, things can get contaminated, but the DNA that was used to solve the crime was vaginal swabs. And in this case, that was not contaminated. Just because I don't know how much detail you want me to get into about vaginas, but it was not contaminated.
They knew that DNA wasn't contaminated, and then they realized that it didn't match any of the boys, men.
Well, I would say it's not that they didn't know at the time it wasn't contaminated. It's that when DNA, the same DNA shows up at different sites and it's the same DNA, they might not know who that person is, but if it's in 3 different women and it doesn't match any of the boys, that means that it's probably one person.
So it did mean that Springsteen and Scott weren't just kind of having their charges dismissed. It kind of ruled them out.
You could say that, but also for whatever reason, just because we didn't know who that DNA belonged to, even Dan, who ended up solving the crime, would never say on the record before he solved it that they still weren't connected to it.
Right.
Because there could be other reasons, like maybe one of them had a boyfriend, although we would have to not know who that boyfriend was because all of the people who were connected to them in any way were tested. All of their DNA was swabbed. So it would have had to been, it was like all these incredibly improbable things that once the DNA inside the girls did not match the boys, yeah, you would think if there's no other material evidence, these boys, there's no way they could have just like stayed convicted, but they were never like absolved of the crime. No one ever said like, you didn't do this. So it's still hung over them.
How did Dan that you're talking about is the homicide cold case detective who kind of is the new person to take over the case all these years later. How did he solve this? Because he got a name, he got an actual person, a killer. He solved it.
It is incredible that Dan solved it. And he started by testing a bullet casing in a drain that John Jones had saved, which is in the first episode. And, we showed the first episode at South by Southwest, and there's like a shot where John Jones's associate is holding the case. And Dan, thought to go back and retest shell casings. And DNA, particularly right now, is just undergoing like weekly sometimes getting better. So I think it was the kind of thing where he was like, I should retest that shell casing. It hasn't been retested in a while. And it so happened that he could not have, the thing that's crazy is he couldn't have solved the crime until this year because they had just found this new match to the shell casing in a different crime in a different city in the States. And that led him to think, oh, wait, there's another gun was connected to this gun. And then he started connecting the DNA, and there's like 2 different kinds of DNA that is collected. There's YSTR DNA and STR, and YSTR is just the male lineage. And so after he found the matching gun, he was able to connect also the YSTR to some other crimes. And so he was able to find the killer, but YSTR is just a male lineage. So it could still be like thousands of people. He knew at that point that it was a serial killer who had murdered. So it's almost definitely the right guy. But it wasn't until he matched the STR, which is the exact person, and he found that under Amy's fingernails, that he was able to be like, this is the person who did it 3.7 million to 1.
Wow.
So it's actually quite complicated how Dan solved the crime. He had to go through a number of steps, but it kept getting closer and closer to the serial killer. And, I don't think this man, Robert Bashir's, who did this crime, wasn't even on our radar.
Really?
Like no one, it's one of these things, because usually it's someone who knew the victims.
Yeah.
This was someone who just floated through town for some unknown reason still. Dan is still working on it. Like they might yet find why he was in town. But but it's just wild. Like, it's not someone, this world of like, when we were making this for as long as we were, you have this idea of who it could be. This person was not even in our stratosphere.
You mentioned at the start of our chat a guy that ordered Sprite. Could this have been him?
It could have been him.
It could have been him. But that's our only little kind of clue.
Well, if you look at, no, there's more clues. If you look at the 5th episode, this guy, Robert Brashers, he has a few different ruses he would use that Dan talks about to get in the door. And some of them, he definitely went to a strip mall more than once. Like, he liked that, I think, because you could get out the back and you could just take off, things that were hidden. He was a smart guy. He kind of like had a few things that he did over and over.
You say he's a serial killer. The other crimes that he committed, were they the same? Was this his kind of MO?
Well, there's overlap in different ways. I would say, like, he didn't always kill people. He would sometimes, it's so weird to talk about just in a normal voice.
I know.
He would sometimes rape them and then let them go, and we don't know why. Sometimes he would kill them. So we have these different clues to what he did, because sometimes he didn't kill people. Sometimes he would let them go. His daughter spoke to us, and that was really revelatory, because, she grew up in kind of I would call it an extremely dysfunctional family, where when he came in, he was almost like a normalizing factor because he protected the family. And the way she talked, it was probably, talking to her was one of the most harrowing interviews I've ever done, because it was just so tragic that someone who was a serial killer would, in her mind, be a stabilizing force, because he kind of protected, like, some people, I think, as long as, the way she explains it is, as long as they protect their family, that's all that matters. And they don't care if they're hurting other people. The family unit is everything. So I think, like, she believes that her mother knew some of it, not probably all of it, but was like protecting her father. And she would talk about how he did all these things, like he would rob Shoney's and dress up like a woman. And he would, he had all these disguises, and they would call him a different name in public. And all this was normalized. She was like 7 years old, and she just thought that was normal, because she came from a place where a lot scarier things happen to young women than just calling your father by a different name. And so I don't know. I guess talking to her made me feel really grateful that I came from a stable family, or a relatively stable one, because I was like, wow, there are other realities that can be born into that are horrific, and she has made it her mission to kind of apologize to all these families for what her father has done, which, she can't, the fact that she would even want to do that is I don't know. I mean, she's been hurt herself so much, and that I guess, like, that's the right thing to do, to think of others, but because she doesn't even know if, when she calls these people, they're even going to want to talk to her, because they are so scarred by what happened to their family members. But I don't know. I was really moved by that.
Well, it's not her responsibility to apologize for something her father did. So no,
it's not. No.
No. When you found out this news that we had the killer, you had a name, Robert, what was the reaction from you and your team? And when you started talking to everyone you'd been interviewing, you've been making this documentary for all these years, and you've got a name.
Well, I was kind of shocked, because it was really hard to make this, and I was starting another project. I was literally in my car driving to a different city when I got the news, and I had to turn right back around to Austin, drop my dog off at my parents' house, and go to shoot the press conference the next day. It was like boom, And I think I knew that I wanted to make it, because I felt like I had left the families with in a spot where, if there was an answer now, it was like I could make a show about it and give some kind of, closure to the story, certainly not to the families, but I felt like I sort of had to do it, but it was also this weird feeling of being pulled back into this dark forest for the whole team. Like we all felt like there was no choice. Like, of course we were going to make it, but there was also like this sort of just like, boomerang where you thought you escaped the darkness and you're just pulled right back.
Well, it's also you were making a documentary about an unsolved cold case and suddenly it was becoming breaking news.
Yes, yes.
Which would have, I can imagine, given you a bit of whiplash.
Yeah, whiplash is a better word. I remember seeing Sean Ayers after, like when we interviewed him a month or so after they realized that it had been solved, he was a different person.
Really?
Like he was so happy that there was an answer. And I mean, I don't think you could feel it. Like it was bizarre because I was like, wait a minute. A serial killer still killed your sister, but it didn't matter. It was like knowing the answer gave, I would say across the board, every family member felt better about having an answer. Even when the answer is, I would argue, darker than, what they thought it was before. There was a solidity of like, I know what happened. Because I think otherwise it just turns over in your head over and over and over.
There's the what ifs and the wondering. And then for the three alive men of the four, they were only recently in February 2026 publicly exonerated. So I can imagine for them as well, it would have felt like closure and they could move on.
I don't know what it feels like to them, if it feels as much of a relief. I think that's going to take longer. Robert Springsteen didn't even come. I think it was just too much for him. Mm-hmm. I think Michael Scott was there. I spoke to him, but Forrest like really opened up to us and shared with us. But, and Maurice, I talked to his family, but Maurice died, so we were not able, it was too late for Maurice. But you saw the toll from his daughter and his ex-wife. And they were very articulate in talking through like what that process was like. And I don't think, I don't think we'll really know how it affects them for a little bit of time. Like it was funny because that was a part of the story where through Claire Huey, who was the filmmaker who was making a film with Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott, kind of that I used as a film within my film to kind of show, she was almost like a proxy for me in a way, but just to show how it even impacts the filmmakers. Like she stopped being a filmmaker when she was making this because she felt like the story was too big and she couldn't handle it and she couldn't give them what she felt like they needed there. I mean, everything this story touched, it just was sort of like a path of destruction. Because I think Claire is a really talented filmmaker, and it makes me really sad that she quit making the movie. I was glad that I was able to use her footage and honor it in some way. But just like, you see in this last episode, I finally get to talk to Forrest and to see Mike, and you really see the impact that this had on them, and their trauma is ongoing, and hopefully people now really know they definitely didn't do it. I mean, 3.7 million to 1. I mean, it's probably more likely that I committed the Yoghurt Shop Murders than, you know what I mean? It's just like, that's a lot of million.
What do you hope people get from watching your documentary?
I just hope people are able to know that it's okay to grieve and to, feel, I don't know. I mean, I think these people let us see, like, how do you gracefully deal with loss? What are ways we can deal with loss? Because we all are going to encounter loss. And I think, by watching the Ayers and Barbara and Sonora go through this, I mean, I think you can just, I think, how do you bring it back to your own life? And, there's something Barbara says You get your own pain in your own time. We all will. We all will. Maybe not like these people, but it's in a way, I think that's, because we were all, at a certain point, we were like, oh my God, this story, it's all these rabbit holes. But I knew I didn't want to make a movie just about rabbit holes. Like, I wanted to make it about something bigger than that. And then that's what came to me. It's like about like dealing with trauma and grief. How do we do that and maintain our humanity, and be good to others?
Thank you to Margaret for joining us on this episode. You can stream the Yoghurt Shop Murders on HBO Max now and find more links to her work in our show notes. True Crime Conversations is hosted by me, Gemma Barth. Our senior producer is Tali Blackman. The group executive producer is Ilaria Brophy, and there's been video editing by Julian Rosario. Thanks so much for listening. I'll be back next week with another True Crime Conversation.